Welcome, sun stabbers, to the bright and sunny plains of the mortal realms, because today we are talking about the Git Mobs of the Gloomspite Gits. Now, if you're not familiar, this is the latest arm of the faction that was bolted on in the most recent expansion for the Gloomspite Gits. These are the Snarlfang Riders and the Chariots and all that kind of good new stuff. Now, the ideas and the underpinnings of what the Git Mobs are in terms of grots that don't mind going out in the sun, that existed conceptually for a while, but it really got fleshed out in terms of model form, of course, like I said, with the last wave, but also in then lore form with the little booklet that came with that pre-release set where they had the models early, and then also in the new battletome. Now, as I've alluded to in several other videos about the Gloomspite Gits, right? They all revere the Bad Moon in some capacity, whether with a religious kind of lens or another kind. I don't know if they just view it as an aspect of Gorka Morka where there's not really a religious context to it. Big or small, everyone has an opinion about the Bad Moon. But there is a small portion of, we'll say, grotdom that is super invested in the mythology of the Bad Moon, meaning why it's there, the story it tells, how it plays into all of grot history. You know, it's something like a scholar, I guess, is probably the closest thing you would say. And they're interested in knowing about this big cosmic drama that's going on above them. This is no different than people who got really interested in the stories of Greek or Norse gods and the drama that happens between them. Because it makes sense in a way, right? This is a story about the Bad Moon and the sun. If you're going to build your entire worldview upon it, then we don't just have the Bad Moon, we have the evil sun, whom they call Glareface Frazzlegit. And while he's not the hero of this story, of course, it is essential for their mythos. Every yin's got a yang, and this is ours. Now, among friends, I've previously made the comparison that these grots are kind of like Batman. Okay, this is the kind of imagery that I use to describe why some grots revere the sun. Batman falls into a well. Bruce Wayne falls into a well, gets attacked by a flock of bats, and freaks out. It's his fear, and then later on in life, he then weaponizes that fear against everybody else. It's almost the same thing. At least the concept of weaponizing your fears, because again, if this is how they understand the world, we're going to start looking for ways to use our understanding of the world against our enemies. And that concept of weaponizing your fear when your fear is the sun is the heart of this practical side here, which we'll get to in just a moment. But just in saying that, right, there's a divide in worldviews that most grots cannot make. For the overwhelming masses of the goblins underground, they think that walking up into the sun is first off deeply uncomfortable. It'll burn your eyes, hurt your skin, that kind of thing, if not debilitating. But then once you're up there, you're a target for all kinds of nasty things. There's monsters, deadly flora, other armies, and something like an orc, even if they don't outright hunt you, they can just beat you up a lot and incorporate you into their army. Not to mention that living above ground now exposes you to all of these event-wide madness things that are happening, right? Like soul wars, the hour of ruin, all of that stuff would be felt. So why would you want to live in the sun when really all you want is the Bad Moon, right? It's better just to wait for the Bad Moon to appear. And when it comes to flipping that ideology, like I said, that represents most grots, to then flipping it to this small niche of them who look at that exact same equation and go, first off, if you just let yourself adjust and toughen up, your eyes can adjust to light. Right, we're not talking about walking on the sun here, right? They just need to be able to function in average daylight, which also includes cloudy, rainy days, which they can do if everyone stops being a baby. Like I said, this is the logic of a Git Mob boss. Secondly, we do not have to be tiny and weak and preyed upon. Grots have access to several animals and creatures, or even just mechanisms, that can support their lightweight. They're literally so small that more things can act as mounts. And putting a grot on top of anything immediately makes it a bigger threat, right? If you're talking about just being afraid of the flora and fauna of the realms, you and whatever you're riding have a better chance of survival together than independently. And of course, the most common of the animals pressed into the service on the surface of the ground are the Snarlfang Wolves. These are, as the name implies, very, very aggressive wolves that can be ridden individually or saddled up like as a two-person rider, or they can be hooked up to a chariot. And while a lot of animals could serve the purpose of just having a grot ride them to be bigger, the wolves offer two things that really, the way I word it, is kind of sync up with what the Git mobs want to do. First of all, they're highly aggressive. The Gits above ground have learned that life on the surface requires decisive action. Strapping yourself to an intelligent pack hunter that wants to take down its prey swiftly, not do a lot of long-term hunting. Nope, we want quick raids in and out. You look at a target, can it feed the pack? Can the pack take it? If either of those is no, we just move right along. It doesn't matter. It's that kind of very base cunning math that pack hunting animals will do, that if you just happen to strap yourself to one of them, you would then also gain the benefits of. But the second thing that makes them very unique is their speed. Like, there's lots of animals out there that can carry a grot, but you want something that can get in there and move fast. And that kind of becomes the ethos of the Git mobs living on land, right? If we aren't going to have these vast armies above ground, shield to shield in raw numbers, we need a different defensive mechanism or gimmick, and the Snarlfang Wolves provide one, and that is speed is their shield. By being able to quickly flank, hit and run, dive in for a quick targeting of the leader in charge, whatever it needs to be. If it has to happen quick, the wolves provide a great way to do that. So between being a premier hunter animal, that is the wolf, and then at this point, seasoned grot warriors, because they're outside long enough to get adjusted to the sun to be able to function in it, you put those things together and you have like a true apex predator in certain regions of the realms. It's crazy. But as I kind of alluded to before, there is a practical edge here. It's not just Gits who got tired of living underground and decided to move up, although I definitely am anti-large crowd enough of a person to probably do that same thing. Nor is it all about engaging in a mythical drama and LARPing as Sun Man instead of Batman. And this has to do with an item that we collectively know as shiny gubbins. You see, while the grots did not technologically develop as a species very much, they did get creative in terms of some aspects, like say alchemy, metallurgy in some aspects, and then magic, of course. And they learned some things that other people would really like to learn themselves. For example, perfect example here, one of these things that's driving scholars in Hish absolutely insane is they want to learn the process for making what are called shiny gubbins. Now that term, shiny gubbins, is a catch-all term for any kind of shiny trinket, totem, metal, anything that a Gloomspite Git may have on them at any given time. Now at its base level, all shiny gubbins are just hunks of metal that are highly reflective, right? That's what they look like when you're staring at them. However, the Gits have a process that, again, like I said, remains a mystery, that essentially turns these shiny hunks of metal into tiny repositories of magic, almost like empty batteries. So you can immediately see why a scholar would want to learn how to do that, how to make anything a battery for realm power. So the reason they do this is that when these grots, collectively called the Git mobs, go above ground and engage with daylight, that being the light of Hish, some of that power is absorbed into the metal. Like I said, acting as a battery. And that brings us to finally why these weird grots, even amongst the cave of other moon clans, are kept around. Because they're useful. Because they provide weapons. Now, this manifests mostly in projecting the very things that make sunlight unbearable for the grots affect their enemies as well. Sort of like they're really scared of sunlight, so these Hish weapons will burst sunlight and stuff like that and flashes at the enemy, sort of as a way of being like, how do you like it, kind of a deal. At an order, all of the shiny gubbins on a chariot can be fired off to blind their target, and weakening any defenses that they can muster. They can be used to distract or confuse, and when the light of Hish is discharged in the presence of the bad moon, the wielder is like nearly invisible to all assailants, right? This mega flash. And in the minds of the Snarlfang Riders, right, this is a part of bringing their mythology and worldview and weaponizing it against their enemies. We hate the sun. Don't you hate the sun now too? When you combine the disorienting nature of combat against the Git mobs, right? They're just coming at you from all different directions, flanking you. The wolves are going after the weakest bits first. And then if the bad moon is up, you have hordes and hordes of Moon Clan Grots coming over hills at you. You can see why they would flock together when the bad moon is near, right? This is why they're an asset that no boss should overlook. The Git mobs bring an immense amount to the overall scrap. And the best thing is they don't just hang out. Like, that's the thing, is the Git mobs are kind of stand off to the side of the rest of Grotdom. But when the bad moon's not there, these guys are out hunting sunlight, right? They're looking for more shiny gubbins. Essentially hunting metal items that they can melt down and have the shamans, through whatever process, turn into shiny gubbins, which means raiding. Vast packs of wolf riders, war wheelers, which are the chariots, all snap shut on caravans, traders, emissaries, anything that's traveling and anything that looks like prey. They rush in, kill them good, take all the metal, and then bring it home. In particular, it's said that the Git mobs really, really love ambushing the Lumineth Realm Lords because they have the best stuff. Like, it's metal that already seems somewhat imbued or in tune with Hysh. They don't go in a whole lot of detail on that, but my assumption based on things is that, like, the metal, because it was like forged and stuff in Hysh, maybe just turns into shiny gubbins easier for the shaman. Because all they're going to do is melt it all down. The spears, everything's too big for them. So it's all going to get melted into something. So I have to imagine it has something to do with that process. The worst thing for them to hunt on the opposite end of the spectrum are Stormcast Eternals, because they have, bar none, the shiniest of the gubbins, but it also dissolves in the lightning before they can take it home, which is lame. And this essentially forms the basic life, but we would say, I don't know, gameplay loop of the Git mobs. They go out, they raid. While you're raiding, you're charging any of the shiny gubbins you already own with Hysh sunlight, and then you take those things home, melt whatever you raided down into shiny gubbins that you then go back outside and do the same thing with. That cycle repeats until the bad moon appears nearby. You go out, discharge all of the batteries that you've been saving, impress the bad moon. When it's gone, get right back into the grind. And so in this way, every time the bad moon appears, you're locked and loaded. Hopefully, with more shiny gubbins than you had last time. But of course, if you paid a lot of attention to the last Grot reveal, you know that that is not all that the Git mobs bring. Because these Grots, just like any other, get real crafty when it comes to their environments. Right? We said the same thing about Moon Clan becoming very crafty in ways of using the flora and fauna in their environment. Well, the world above ground has pushed the Git mobs to lean into a different kind of innovation. One that is very obviously useful to any kind of loon boss. You see, above ground, attacking your enemies at range is important. Weakening up the defenses of something big and tanky, the polar opposite of Grots, that's important. It also taught them that a great way to become prey is to have something swoop down from above you, like a bird just picking up a Grot for dinner. And thus, with these observations about the modern world, the Doom Diver catapults were born. This is essentially a weapons system, if you want to put it in that the name would imply. It is a catapult, but instead of launching artillery shells or, warp lightning discharges or whatever the Skaven have going on, the Gloomspite Gits use the most available ammunition source that they have, which is themselves. Some crazy Git with a particularly thick skull will put on a helmet, strap a bomb to the helmet on top of them. They'll put on a crude set of false wings that almost look like they've tied like a kite to each arm. And they fire themselves at the enemy, attempting, often in vain, to glide into the enemy defenses or the biggest monster or whatever they can do to do the most damage, right? And detonate themselves upon it. It is insane. It is wacky. And yet, it is the most innovative that the Grots have ever been, right? I'm just imagining a Git mob brain trust watching the first demonstrations of this thing going, wow, this is some big thinking, right? This is some high-tech stuff. Watch out, Keragen overlords. We're coming to win the game of civilization with our tech tree maxed out, right? Meanwhile, they're just launching each other into walls and stuff, which is exactly how I imagine all of that happening. But really the evolution here is the willingness to build stuff, right? That pseudo-engineering mind. Because the actual invention here, rather than being the whole weapon system of the Doom Diver, it's the catapult. Other inventions that have been brought into Grotdom recently are things like the chariot. Also extremely useful because there's little else to replace them with in terms of heavier, fast-moving things, for the Grots as a species. And these represent, these innovations and things that they build are great because they can trade those with a local Git Mob scrap or boss or anything like that in exchange for food, poisons, all the stuff from the underworld that they don't have access to. Trade it up here. We'll give you stuff that you don't understand. And it becomes a bridge to another world, even though they're all Grots. And I have chatted about Git Mobs, have been largely held at arm's length by most of the rest of the Gloomspite Gits. But the disdain that exists for the Git Mobs evaporates when one Grot in particular enters the chat, and that is Drogs the Sun Chompa. Now, on the surface level, this is a new character that was introduced recently. On the surface, he's just a named character for the Git Mobs, and narratively, he is their unequivocally most successful boss. If the stories are to be believed, this dude's been riding around the realms for centuries, raiding, slashing, and killing, all on a personal quest that he wants to essentially absorb all the light of Hysh. So in this drama of the evil sun and the bad moon, Drogs wants to be the hero who bleeds the sun dry, which, cut off a guitar riff for that, because that's pretty metal AF. But it's just the idea of he wants to get so many shiny gubbins that he pulls all the magic out of Hysh. Possible? Metal? Absolutely. Now, Drogs has a killer weapon. It's a metallic meteorite that's like teardrop shape, and he set it into the hilt of his weapon like a war pick. His shield has shiny gubbins melted into it so he can blind all of his opponents as they come at him. He outfitted his mount, which is a giant wolf named Jagged Snarl, with this cool, almost like an iron halo of shiny gubbins that essentially blinds or burns anything that gets too close. So he has so much of this Hysh energy here that he basically acts like a magnifying glass on a hot sunny day and can just burn and scorch things. And all of those individual aspects, right, all his veteran status, his amazing weapon and shield and mount, all of that, including the wolf, make Drogs a formidable war boss. But there is a secret here that you and I as readers get to know that the other Grots in the story don't. This is not the first Drogs. Grots simply are not that long-lived without very, very impressive magics. Instead, the real story here is that long, long ago, in a cave under a Hysh enlightenment engine, which basically makes everything smarter around it, a pack of wild wolves gave birth to a new litter. This is where Jagged Snarl, the wolf, was born. And influenced by those magics, saturating its home, Jagged Snarl developed into this creature with a very wild intellect. At some point when it was young, Jagged Snarl was caught, pressed into the service of the Git Mobs, but it took to the role really well and even enjoyed serving under, its boss, the first rider, some dude named Drogs the Sun Chompa. One day, during a raid against some Lumineth, Drogs took an arrow to the chest and died, and Jagged Snarl, his mount, remained nearby and watched as the very impressive second-in-command ran up and changed into Drogs' outfit as fast as he could and assumed the identity of the fabled warlord. Anyone who knew the truth, who had actually seen either this happening or knew what the other guy looked like, was immediately killed, but this is essentially how Drogs became a forever story. So now Drogs the Sun Chompa is more like Zorro, right? It's a persona that's passed on, but now it's being facilitated more and more by Jagged Snarl, who essentially chooses the next Drogs from amongst the lieutenants of the Git Mobs forces when the previous Drog dies. And I love the idea that the real character you're looking at is the wolf. However, I can't say that too much because the book does make it very clear Jagged Snarl seems to have met its match when it comes to the current incarnation of Drogs. Because this is the Grot who's introduced all of these new whatnots, which is the catch-all term that they have for creations, inventions, styles. He's the one who designed that new Halo weapon around Jagged Snarl. He's coming up with a lot of the new tech, pushing the Grots to look more at stuff like the Doomdiver catapult, the war wheelers, that kind of thing. So we get the sense that this incarnation of Drogs is the one who's pushing most of the model line that we see now. Which is cool because that means it's innovation. And so like all my videos, I want to pivot into ending with why is this cool? Well, this is a whole new facet of Gits, right? Life on land presents an entirely different set of challenges than living in caves and stuff. There's lots of room for expansion within the model line and the story. To be honest, I had really wished that Spiderfang was kind of brought in here. I know that they are their own thing, but if living above ground was more about harmony with animals and that kind of stuff, I think it could be cool. And while these aren't the most iconic of like the Grots in general, I still think the Moon Clan are with the squigs and stuff. It's hard to argue. The Doomdiver catapult is truly an iconic part of Warhammer history. I mean, it was just one of the funniest units to exist in Warhammer Fantasy battles, and was given a fitting facelift in the new edition. So I'm personally very happy with the new addition to the Gitmobs thing. I like this idea of expanding the mythos and having like, Frazzlegit, Glareface Frazzlegit, the sun, kind of act as sort of like I said, the yin to the yang or the devil to God, just as this antagonistic force. It really kind of fleshes out what they're doing in the downtime when the bad moon's not around. That they're playing out this whole mythos and they're talking about it and trying to understand it. I think all of that went into making this book actually one of the more interesting Gloomspite Gits books that they've put out. And I look forward to more expansions to stuff going on in the Gitmobs in the future. As far as stuff that I would like to see, I'd love to hear your thoughts, right? Leave in the comments below. If you could add a unit to the Gitmobs, what would it be? For me, I would love, if they're going to stay with wolves, give me a big dire wolf that has like a howdah on the back. I think that could be cool, like something to ride on, like a little platform. Or I'd like to see some other speedy units that have like blades on the side, and the whole point is they're purely there for impact charges, but you can fire them off like missiles. Like a rhino with blades on the side or something. I don't know why I said a rhino, but you know what I mean. Something big with inertia. But I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you like the Gitmobs? And with the most recent stuff previewed for the Next General's Handbook in 2026, I'm curious if you are going to be using more of them, because there's actually a, what do they call it? A battle formation that has more rules for them. So let me know in the comments below, and I will catch you very soon in my next video. Happy wargaming, friends.